Looks like it.
Yeah, it'd be nice if our commissioners were here. More than three. They all said they were coming.
Good evening, everybody. I see that it's 7 o'clock, but we're going to wait a little longer before we start the meeting, and we think we have some more folks showing up to have a quorum. So hang with us. Thank you. No. And it sounded like whatever came up with it. It's really weird. I'd never heard anything like it, but in talking to me, it also said they were still some of these things. It's very concept still.
So with some hits. You can give it one more minute. It's just now 7.
Okay. Seeing as it's after 7 o'clock and we have 5 folks with us for a quorum, 5 is a quorum, right? I believe.
5 of 9.
Yeah, okay. So I will call to order the Thursday, August 3rd, 23 meeting of the Kalamazoo City Planning Commission. First of all, we have the roll call.
Burgess,
Here.
Chambers,
Here.
Curtis, DeCenzo,
Here.
Harrison, Milliken, Patelko,
Here.
Pitts, Swan.
Here.
Okay. Before we get any further along, I do want to say that we have several places later in the agenda where the public is welcome to give public comment, and that's also available through the phones. So I want to give you the number now in preparation for that. The number to call is 888-382-9556. And with that, let's move to the agenda. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda?
No.
Okay. I would look for a motion to approve or any concerns.
Motion to approve. Support.
Motion from Commissioner Swan with support from Commissioner Chambers. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The agenda is approved. While we normally approve minutes from a previous meeting, our meeting was just back as recently as July 20, so we're going to be looking at those in our September 7 meeting. So next up is communications and announcements. Do you have anything? Okay, nothing there. So then we're going to move on to our public hearing for the evening. We have a request for a special use permit for a group daycare at 3916 Bronson Boulevard. This is, shall we do a staff report for that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Burgess. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. The staff report in front of you has the more detailed information. I've got a brief presentation on the request for a special use permit at 3916 Bronson Boulevard, which, similar to the last meeting, is an existing home daycare up to 6 children seeking to expand to 7 to 12 capacity. And there on the cover page there is a photograph of the house from the street. Moving forward, there's the aerial photo. The location is on Bronson Boulevard, approximately halfway between White's and Kilgore Road on the west side of the road. It's a single-family home zone district and surrounded by single-family homes. The little bit of green there in the northwest corner is the Kalamazoo Country Club, and you can see White's Lake there at the other side of the photograph. And the parcel is highlighted there before. Kenzie Clancy is the applicant and the homeowner. The house sits on about 13,000 square feet of land. The home itself is approximately 4,000 square feet. The daycare is currently licensed. The hours are not proposed to change, and there's an age limit of younger children, and to manage the traffic flow, you can see in some of the photos later in the staff report is a little bit of a hammerhead style turnaround. And the property itself is, from the front, you saw the photograph, very flat yard. The rear yard has a lot of relief. It drops down quite a bit, and there's a play area back there, a heavy tree cover. So plenty of area in the backyard, and I understand that the rear yard is fenced. Looking at the zoning, the zoning of all of the parcels in every direction is RS5, which is a single-family zone district. The houses matches the appearance, the generally character of the neighborhood all around it. And similarly, looking at the future land use map, the long-range plan shows that it's intended to remain a single-family area, and you have the country club property there in green, which means kind of a recreation open space. Again, here's another photograph. You can see the mailbox we're looking from about the street there. You can see the curb approach. There's vehicle bays for the 2 cars for the homeowners, approximately room for 4 to 6 vehicles just in the driveway, and you can see 2 spaces off to the side there and the brick wall in front. Here is a view of Bronson Boulevard looking north from the house to give an idea of the concept and location on the street. It's pretty much a straight line up to White's there. And as you look southerly, you can see the road starts to curve before an intersection there. And you can see the residential nature of the street there. And this photograph here is looking from about the location of from behind the house. Looking down, you can see the play area. It's quite large, and there's room for additional toys or outdoor play area. And it's, that contrast between the front yard and the rear yard. You can see the heavy shade, a lot of room back there, and from what I understand, it serves really well for the kids at the daycare currently. So with that background on the property, the zoning, and the house itself, going through the criteria that for a special use permit approval, staff is recommending approval of the request. And the reasons, some of the background per the standards for the special use permit are: the use is compatible with the surrounding land area. The daycare isn't seeking to expand the hours, has plenty of room for the children within the house and for the outdoor play areas. And the yard is fenced, and the home, unlike the request at the last meeting, Bronson Boulevard is classified as an arterial, so they meet that requirement as well, being on the arterial. That number 2 is that the proposed use complies with the use standards of the zoning ordinance, and that is the home maintains its residential character and appearance. There are no plans for any outside changes. That the daycare is licensed. The daycare is currently licensed and is seeking application from the state To go to 7 to 12, the first step for that is to receive local zoning approval, which is this tonight. And the third item, again, is the being on the arterial or collector. So it complies with those standards. The location and design of the proposed minimizes the adverse effects and the visual impact. Again, it's a residential structure. The existing play area is already out there, and it does not appear to dominate the site in any way and meets that square footage. The total is 100 square feet for the average children in attendance. Does the use minimize any environmental impacts? It's a residential home. There's going to be no environmental impacts. That there is adequate road capacity to serve the proposed use. Bronson Boulevard as a collector, is designed to serve a little bit heavier of a traffic load. It's a through street. I'm confident that Bronson Boulevard has sufficient capacity. That the proposed special use is designed to ensure safe ingress and egress to the site, with the existing driveway being so wide, providing plenty of room for people to pull in or pull off to the side if someone else is showing up. And Kenzie Clancy has informed me the way that she schedules the times is to try and do it in a tiered fashion to prevent everyone from showing up at the same time. That the proposed special use is designed to have adequate access for fire, EMS, emergency response. Again, that large, wide open driveway and access to the door. There's nothing preventing access to the house, and that access to the rear is through a gate and steps. And there's clear access there. That the proposed use complies with the standards of Chapter 6, which are the general development standards, screenings, form standards. Those do not apply to this type of use in this zone at this location, so they aren't relevant. And the proposed use complies with all the other standards applicable to the ordinance as far as use, layout, and general development characteristics. And again, because of all the reasons for the use standard, the impact, the size of the property, it doesn't bump up against any other issues within the code. And with that being said, that is the presentation. If there's any questions on the staff report or information, and Ms. Kenzie Clancy here is here as well to speak to the request. Any questions for me?
Any questions for staff?
There was a mailing that went out to neighbors. Was there any response to the mailing?
Yes, I did not receive any written responses. I spoke to, it's 5 or 6 different neighbors. One was just outside of the mailing area.
Was there support or any information that's relevant to the criteria?
Yes, I would say one was not in support expressly. I would describe the rest as seeking more information and curious about it. They were not for or against. Some items that came up from those phone calls and conversations were questions about the age of the children. There was a number of people concerned about Bronson Boulevard and the access and the drop-off and the safety of the children related to that. And there is I'm trying to think, and that was generally, noise was the third thing I would say would be a concern about noise.
Thank you.
Any other? I wanted to ask about fencing. We've done a couple of these now, and fencing is always talked about in detail. I must have missed it on the plan that it was fenced. I just heard you mention that the backyard is fenced.
Yeah, the area around the play area is not fenced, but the entire yard is fenced.
Is that a requirement?
Yes.
Fencing?
Thank you. That is one of the 4.2 requirements as well, that wherever the outdoor area is, it be within a fenced and enclosed area.
And this is in compliance with that.
The children can't leave the rear yard, and the state licensing, I've seen it reference in yards that aren't fenced that there's a parent out there, but that's a long way of saying, in my interpretation, the area where the children play is fenced. I believe that meets the criteria.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, do we usually have the public hearing? Do we have the applicant come up first? Okay, let's welcome Ms. Clancy if she wants to make a presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for meeting with me today. So I've had this home daycare since December of last year. I have my 2 children in it and 4 additional kids right now. It is in good standing with the state. I follow all the licensing requirements. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background as well as my plan going forward for the home daycare. I'm really passionate about early childhood education, equitable access for community services like daycares. I know that every child needs a strong role models and people to nurture and care for them. So that's what I'm hoping to do. I have a bachelor's degree in elementary education. My master's is in educational leadership. I was an elementary teacher for 12 years in Michigan and Arizona. And I know firsthand how difficult it is to find daycare. In Arizona, my daughter went to a home daycare that was wonderful. When we decided to move to Michigan, when I was pregnant with my son, I called probably 6 or 7 daycares. I had a couple job offers, called 6 or 7 daycares, and none of them had room. They were all booked out for at least a year or 2. And I know that my experience is not uncommon at all. So I'd always kind of wanted to have a preschool of my own, so I chose to go that alternate route. And we decided that it would be smart to start my own and provide that service to the community. But I know not all families have that option or have that background, so I want to make sure that all families are able to have quality daycare. Right now, with my 6 kids, we have a big focus on social emotional learning, on showing kindness to each other, taking turns, a lot of opportunities for fine and gross motor development. They try new skills, make their own healthy snacks. Like, I really want to cater to the whole child and provide that service to families. Lots of books and stories and opportunities for literacy growth as well. So my current plan right now is I'd like to open it up to 6 more kids and have more of a structured preschool environment. I've already talked to an assistant that I'm hoping to hire to provide, job growth as well is important. She has experience as a preschool teacher and as a preschool director, assistant director. So all the kids will be very cared for, supervised at all times. And I'm also not wanting to grow really fast either. I do have a waiting list, but I want to bring a couple kids on and make sure we have everything set before bringing a couple more in. So I'm not looking to have a bunch of chaos join me all at once. So in talking to neighbors, I have heard a few concerns, and they are all completely valid concerns. I've heard a couple of questions about, there's a deeded lake access on White's Lake. We're not planning to take the kids there at all for a lot of reasons. I know the congestion was another concern with street traffic. The structured preschool program, I am planning to do different hours, so drop off later, pick up a little bit earlier, so that should minimize a little bit of that congestion. Noise is also a valid concern. Kids are loud. But I really think with 6 additional kids and the one having an assistant there, I think will help with the noise. I don't think the noise will be that much more than what it is now. And I admit it is sometimes a little bit loud. But that assistant, if a toddler is having a toddler moment, can take the kids inside and I can stay out with the rest of them. If kids are having a disagreement, she can take them in and facilitate a conversation with them so that I can supervise the rest. So I really think noise will be mitigated a little bit with an assistant. So we do want to be good neighbors and want to be, aware of everyone around us. So I appreciate everyone coming out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kotze. Did anyone have any questions from the commission for the applicant? Oh, okay, seeing none, thank you. At this time then, I guess I'm going to open a public hearing, and we are now open. If anyone has any comments they want to share about this special use permit for the group daycare at 3916 Bronson Boulevard, please come to the podium or call 888-382-9556. I see no one coming to the podium. Oh, looks like we have one. Okay. Please state your name, sign in. Do we need?
Hi, my name is Jason Haystack, and I prepared something in writing because I didn't have a whole lot of time to go through all this, but is it okay I can just go ahead and read this?
Yeah, you have 3 minutes, so go right
I have
ahead.
3 minutes. That's it? Wow. Mr. Durkee, is that you? So I did send a written response to you, but I wonder if one of the attachments was large, you might not have gotten it. I will try to resend that to you. I don't know if that matters in this whole thing, but I did send that to you yesterday, and it might not have gone through because I had a couple pictures and attachments, and it might have been too large. So I do apologize for that. Did you actually get anything in your email? You did not? Okay. All right, I got to read this fast. My name is Jason Haystack. I'm here with my wife, Ryan, to respond to the special use permit proposal. A lot of activity has been in motion for several months on this, and we're just becoming informed now in order to provide our input. We appreciate being given the time this evening. I also sent Mr. Durkee a separate written response and some attachments yesterday, and I'll follow up on that. A little bit of background. My wife and I were both raised in Kalamazoo and have lived as a married couple here for the last 23 years, raising our family here. We're supporters of KPS, Kalamazoo Community, and several different capacities, Girls on the Run, Kalamazoo Public Schools, Loaves and Fishes, and First Day Shoe Fund, to name some. We've lived at 3904 Bronson for 7 years, and that's directly next door to Kenzie's house at 3916. We've spent a lot of time and money to update and maintain our home and property over the years, and we enjoy our backspace and the serenity there. We also live and work out of our home, much like Kenzie does with her family and daycare business. We have read and understand the city's strategic vision alignment. We also understand Kenzie's intent to grow her business and profitability. That's the purpose of running a business, and we respect that. Kenzie and her family have been nice neighbors, and we have nothing in our response is personal. But specifically in response to the proposal for the group daycare, we feel the need to offer clarifying information to the proposal and findings so that a robust, thorough evaluation is ensured. Since the opening of the daycare in December 22, we've noticed significant noise issues on a daily basis during the warmer months when our windows are open or if we're outside in our back patio. That is at the current daycare capacity of 1 to 6 children. The noise isn't background noise like a lawnmower or cars going by, but children crying or at times screaming. As parents ourselves, we understand that children cry and scream, but it's disruptive now with 6 children, and they're all of similar ages, and that would be kind of the way it would be going forward. Sorry. The noise has disrupted our ability to work at home peacefully when inside our house, and it's also disrupted the use of our back patio and space during those playtimes. Our home's value comes to us from being in our backyard, where we enjoy the sights and sound of nature. I'm running out of time. Is there any way I can get an extension?
I'll give you 30 seconds to summarize, please, real quick.
Okay. Wow. In conclusion, we appreciate the notification given to us and the time to speak on this topic tonight. We are simply here in reaction of the notice and intentions presented to us. Kenzie intends to double her business and increase her profits. The doubling of the current daycare will amplify the disruption of our living and working in our home and on our property. I urge the Commission to not allow one to profit at the expense and loss of the surrounding neighbors and neighborhood. Again, we have no animosity or anything. She's a great neighbor. It's just we wanted to make sure that our concerns were addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Excuse me, anyone else from here to speak? Bobby, anybody on the phones?
Good evening, caller. You're on with the City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission. This is for public comment in reference to a special use permit request at 3916 Bronson Boulevard. Caller, are you there? Sorry, caller. The volume was off. This is special.
Yes,
Public comment for 3916 Bronson Boulevard. You're on with.
Bobby, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, sir.
My name's Richard Stewart. I'm a resident of the city of Kalamazoo and have been since 1987. I wanted to call in support for this applicant. I frequently watch these meetings and I have not seen a more qualified applicant apply for this before. I've recently seen 2 previous approved applicants who were less qualified, and I believe we need to focus on spreading these types of services out throughout the city for the convenience and the needs that exist throughout the city. And this is an example of an applicant who is more qualified than others that have been approved and is in an area that also needs these services. So I am just adding my voice in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
That appears to be it.
Okay, thank you. We have one more person in the audience that wants to speak.
Hi, I'm Nancy Eimers. I'm really glad to meet you. You sound amazingly qualified, and I was incredibly impressed by everything you said. However, I am also a neighbor whose yard abuts the ravine, and my husband and I are retired professors and writers. We're concerned about the noise. At this point, it's a very sweet sound that we like. We're concerned about an additional 6 children. I wasn't going to say anything because especially after hearing you, I'm glad to meet you, and I think your plans sound excellent, and the children would be lucky to work with you. But that is a concern for me and my husband, and thank you very much. And again, I'm sorry to say anything. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And we will move to our portion. Our general process is we would look for a motion to approve or let it go, and then have a discussion after we have a motion. Any motion?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, motion from Commissioner DeCenzo. And is there support for the motion?
Second.
Support from Commissioner Swan. Okay, we have a motion to approve the request for the special use permit. Discussion about the motion. Sure, Commissioner Harrison.
I think 3 things that, as we heard the discussion and the conversation unfold, that I thought about is just the start of adding the additional youth to the environment, to the child care environment. I think that's important. And then I thought about the measures that the child care would put in place to make sure that either there's thoughts of collaboration or future growth or neighborhood or the neighbors' consideration to make sure their concerns are addressed in a timely manner. And then about long-term future growth, right? Thinking that it starts with 6, the next thing is 12, you got 24, you're great, right? So eventually you can't stay in this space, right? So are we doing a disservice by, granting you a special permit to grow in this space, or should we encourage other, processes or resources to make sure we can put you in a space that you can grow the business accordingly? So I think those are the things I was thinking about, especially with the residents' concern, seeing that it is a neighborhood business that would have additional clients that it could serve moving forward.
Okay.
I'm just wondering what the hours of operation are. What time in the morning do you start and what time are you done with the kids?
7:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m.
7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, I had a comment for Kinsey. My other question, as far as like the additional kids that will be coming in, and I'm sorry to have you come back up after you had walked away. With the additional kids that will be added, if you added in an additional 6 for now, how is the space? Where exactly do you have the kids as far as the space and like safety and like fire concerns?
Yeah. So with licensing standards, I needed to come up with a fire plan. We've been working on remodeling the downstairs to our house. So we're moving the preschool down to the downstairs. We have a big deck,
Okay.
or 2 big decks. We're moving to the downstairs area as soon as that's done and we get that area approved by my licensor. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then, let me see. And as far as the age range of kids, how old is the group of kids that you have currently?
My youngest is 18 months, and the oldest is, right now I have a couple school-age kids and school is off, but typically the oldest is about 4.
Okay. And when it comes to the traffic, like as far as like your parents dropping them off, what's the actual stagger between each drop-off to keep into respectful of your neighbors?
Right, well, currently, there's about half an hour between my current drop-off of 7:30. Some parents drop off at 7:45 or 8:15, so I'm closer to 9. When I open the preschool, that's gonna be a little later at like 8:30.
And then when it comes to the pickup, how staggered are your times for pickup?
So again, for pickup, some parents pick up right at 4. Others, it's closer to 4:15 or 4:30.
Gotcha. And then what else was I going to say? Because I was just really concerned about that as far as like traffic and like with the kids and things like that, making
Yeah.
sure that there was enough gap in between. And then typically like when the parents are dropping off kids, on average, does that take like 5 to 10 minutes to drop them off for them to move?
I'd say less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, sign in and then give a hug, and usually the kid's off playing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's all the questions that I
Okay,
had for you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Please go ahead.
Oh, sorry, this is for the applicant also. Apologies. Could you give a summary of the current sort of day split, indoor versus outdoor, and maybe what your plans are?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So currently we eat snack at 9:30. After snack, we get cleaned up, go outside and play if the weather's good. Then we come in and do some activities indoors. We eat lunch at 11:30, have rest time right after that. So kids they're all awake by about 2. Then we eat our afternoon snack, and then either activities inside or we go outside to play again until parents pick up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Real quick, start date that you plan on adding the additional kids to, or the children to your group?
Either mid-October or early November.
Okay. And then is there a complaint process or a conversation process put in place with the neighbors or the neighborhood for anything that might come up while you exist?
Not currently, but that is a good idea. So for any neighbors, I'm always open, like knock on my door if you need anything, if you have any complaints, or like we can brainstorm ways to help some of these issues, the traffic and noise. So yeah, not currently, but you're always welcome to come by and talk to me, especially outside of daycare hours.
Okay, any other thoughts at this time? Okay. I hear some concerns about noise. I hear a highly qualified person and a service that is needed in the community. That's the balance. We have a motion with support on the floor, and we've had our discussion, so let's have a roll call vote.
Burgess,
Yes.
Chambers,
Yes.
DeCenzo,
Yes.
Harrison,
No.
Patelko,
Yes.
Pitts,
Yes.
Swan.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The special use permit is approved. Next on our agenda, F, is discussion and action items. I understand we don't have any tonight. Next up, we're going to go into reports. We're going to hear a city planner's report on the presentation on the proposed zoning code and map update. And I wanted to throw in an idea here, if the rest of the board is going to go for it with me. We have a new commissioner who's only been here for one meeting. We're going to, after we hear the planner's presentation, we're going to have our last chance to have a really substantive discussion about the code changes before we have a first public hearing next month. I thought it would be good to insert a little public comment section between the report and our discussion. And we would ask that the public comment, anyone who wanted to public comment specifically about the zoning codes changes, do it at that time. And thought that might be a useful thing to get the comment one more time before we had our discussion. Would the board be in support of doing that? Okay, I don't see any objection. So, okay, so we'll go ahead with that in mind. Christina, our
Sure.
report. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. So I believe this is at least presentation 4 in front of this body on the proposed code update. We are nearing the stage where we're going to start to move to an official approval process next month, is the plan. And we wanted to give the commissioners one more opportunity to ask questions of staff prior to the public hearing. Now, of course, you can ask questions during the public hearing, but we want to make sure that there's a clear level of understanding of the code and the changes, and get all those questions answered now if we have that opportunity. The presentation I'm going to give you, there's a lot of slides in there that you have seen multiple times, as well as the community have seen multiple times. I always include these slides about zoning because I don't know who's tuning in for the first time, and I want to make sure that we are grounding this work in all of those key elements of why we have zoning codes and what we mean and how we do engagement and so forth. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk again that first part, which you've seen before, but the why, the how, and the outreach that's happened. We're going to talk pretty specifically about the proposed code and what has changed between the drafts, and then we're going to talk about next steps. So as you remember, we have a zoning code because tied to our master plan, right? So our master plan sets out the community vision. The zoning code is a tool, not the only tool, but a tool to help implement that vision, particularly as it relates to land use and transportation. The Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 master plan lays out some very specific goals and tasks related to updating the zoning code, and that's what we're working through, and actually have been working through in small incremental pieces since the approval of the master plan. So all of our work as staff is always tied very directly to the strategic vision, which is those 10 set of overarching goals for the community's vision. And so specifically, we talk about good governance. And I think the others are fairly self-explanatory, but good governance is feels a little more nebulous. What that means for staff, is particularly as it relates to the zoning code, is having a document that is effective, that staff can properly administer. There's no point in putting things in the zoning code if we can't actually enforce or administer them. So making sure that the document works for staff as well as for those property owners who the zoning is impacting. Complete neighborhoods, connected city, economic vitality, and environmental responsibility all are reflected in the zoning code and this code update. And again, the master plan calls out a need to update the zoning code and gives us the charge that we need to make sure that land use and transportation are working in harmony. So thinking when we're putting out a land use regulation, how does it also impact the streets, or how the streets might impact it? As I mentioned, we chose a path of slowly updating the zoning code in small pieces. That allowed us to have a lot of engagement with the community. In many places, it allowed us to respond directly from a neighborhood plan and move right into rezoning for that neighborhood. And so far, we've done a lot of pieces. The other thing to say is that since 2005, which is the last time we updated our zoning code in a wholesale way, we've not ever done this kind of small incremental pieces before. In 2005, we updated it wholesale, and the document was housed in Appendix A of our municipal code. We are keeping the zoning code in the municipal code, but we're moving it to a different chapter, Chapter 50. And the reason why we didn't just keep it in Appendix A and updated it is because we realized back in 2018 it needed so many updates that tweaking the language would have been really hard. It was better to start with a new document. And so we've been slowly, what I say every time, we take something out of A, we run it through the wash, right? Do we keep this? Does it need to change? What does it look like? And then it goes into Chapter 50 with additional new language. And so a lot of the changes that are being brought forward with the zoning code update are doing just that. It's bringing existing code language into 50 after it's been reviewed and updated. And often the review and updates focus on things like, did it read okay? Does it need more illustrations? Do we need more definitions? Is the terminology in the code, the verbiage, does it read in a way that most people can understand, or is it super jargony and code-like? And so that reflects a lot of the changes that you'll see in this document. So we started this process officially in March. We released a draft map and a draft code. We proceeded to have a public meeting to discuss in detail what the changes were. We did that meeting in 3 different locations, east, central, and west within the city. All property owners that were proposed to have a zoning change on their property received a postcard at the same time, alerting them to the process, giving them an idea of when meetings would occur. The draft code and map are available and have been available online. The map is this neat little interactive map, and you can zoom in and out and look at your property and changes that are existing around you. Because zoning can feel very personal. If your property designation is changing, we wanted to give people space to meet with staff to understand how it might impact their own property. And so we set up a series of one-on-one meetings, or allowed people to set up one-on-one meetings with us to ask those questions in a one-on-one setting and not necessarily in a large group setting, which doesn't always lend itself to tell me what's happening for me kind of questions. We've done presentations and had discussions in front of the Natural Features Protection Review Board, obviously this board as well. In June, we updated from draft 1. We took all the changes. We took the comments and we reviewed them and considered staff edits, edited the document and released draft 2. We held a meeting at the end of June in this room, so it was streamed and recorded, that went through the changes that from draft 1 to draft 2, and received some great feedback from the community that evening. Since then, we have gone in front of the City Commission. Again, we did it right at the beginning of the process. Did it again in July, on July 17th, presented to the Committee of the Whole. That's the first meeting of their evening where they discuss and learn about upcoming actions and things that are coming, that will eventually come forward to them, an opportunity to learn, much like this is for you tonight. and we did a presentation that evening. Any meeting that was recorded, whether it was NFP, this body, or City Commission, links to those meetings, you can always find them on the city's YouTube channel, but we've tried to also link them directly to the Imagine Kalamazoo Zoning Code update page, just so you have a one-stop place to kind of go through and listen to all of them. So we have 10 chapters in the zoning code. The ones in blue are already existing in Chapter 50, and they're just having additional language added or some tweaks to them. And then the 3 in green, landscape and screening, signage, and lighting, are already existing in Appendix, or are existing in Appendix A, and are coming over to Chapter 50 with this process. As I've talked before, some of these changes impact other municipal code documents. So we are going to be taking some nuisance standards that currently exist in Appendix A in the zoning code and placing them in the nuisance chapter, because that's the best place for them to be administered. I mentioned it several times, we have an animal code that includes regulations for things like backyard poultry and rabbits. Those rules are moving to the zoning code because they talk specifically about setbacks and placement of the hutch or the coop, and that is a zoning matter. So they are being moved over to the zoning code. And then we're going to be editing 2 municipal code documents that relate to sign construction and the posting of signs in public places, and that's just to make sure that those 2 documents and the sign code and the zoning code are all talking and working in concert and not against each other. We are also going to be removing some design guidelines that were placed over the last 15 years, 12 years in the downtown and some of the areas south of the downtown, because with the new code, those areas are our walkable urban neighborhoods. The code language that we're putting there includes a lot of the things that are in the design guidelines. Things like entrance requirements and transparency and having buildings closer to the street, all things that are associated with downtown and the areas directly adjacent to it. So, wanting to make sure that design of buildings help support that walkability. We don't need 2 sets of guidelines doing that. We just need 1. So let's talk about some of the things that have changed. I'm going to start with general requirements. So the very first section of the zoning code. One of the things that we updated is, and I'll just flip to that real quick, and it's a little faint, but the first spread of the document is a how do you use this, how do you use these regulations? It's kind of a how-to guide. And it has long said, hey, you look at your zoning district, and then you look at your uses, and then you look at your standards, if they're either form-based standards or regular standards. And that's kind of the order of operations before you decide if you're going to do a project and what it looks like. One of the things that we've added to that for in your first step, look at your zoning district, but you also need to look at your overlay district, specifically if you're located in the Natural Features Protection Overlay District, because we want you to have that information before you start to design your site. That way you are taking those features into consideration, which is part of the intent of the that overlay district. So added NFP to that. We've done a lot of updates to the definitions. We've renumbered all the definitions, and we've clarified the street types. Because some of them needed, we needed to update the definitions because we updated our street types with the street design manual back in 2021. In other places, we just needed to clarify what those street types, how they serve the community. And then the other bit of general requirements is what's called non-conforming standards. And this is probably as codey as you can get in the zoning code outside of maybe administration and enforcement. Non-conforming standards, these are standards for how you treat a lot or a building or a use or kind of site characteristics like sign or landscaping when they no longer comply with the current code standards. So they were built legally following old code. What do you do with them now, right? And so this section lays out, when you need to come into compliance, what changes you would need to make and so forth, so you can follow and get assurance to understand how you can operate as these codes may change over time. Zoning districts. I'm going to talk in detail about the commercial districts that we created and the districts that are going away in a couple of minutes. So I won't go into detail here, but know that this update is not just a text change, even though that's what we've spent a lot of time on. It's also a map change. So we looked at properties that are currently zoned commercial and said, should they be commercial? Yes or no? If they should be zoned commercial, what is the right district? If they shouldn't be zoned commercial, what is the right district? And then we went up and down some of our more commercial streets and kind of did the same exercise. Should the property be zoned commercial on this corridor? Yes or no? And then which category should it be in? The city has a lot of commercial zoning right now. And one of the challenges with that is that many of our commercial districts either don't allow residential or they only allow it in certain locations. And that doesn't reflect kind of the market. And so we've seen a lot of variances over the years requesting residential. Two, that's not our pattern in Kalamazoo. We have very few areas that are solidly commercial. It tends to be a mix. So we'll have our nodes that clear commercial area, and then it kind of goes back and forth, sometimes lot to lot, sometimes block to block, sometimes it's a mix. And we want to make sure that we have code requirement, that our code reflects that. So we are really heavily zoned for pure commercial right now, and are dialing that back a bit, thinking about how we put mixed-use districts in places and keep kind of pure commercial, especially on the ground floor, only in key locations. We have made several changes to the zoning map since the first iteration, and there's still a couple more on the table. This, of course, includes the properties at Drake and Stadium, which were removed from this process back in April, early May. 904 Hotop, which is a property off Riverview Drive, east of the Kalamazoo River in the East Side neighborhood, was left off, and it's currently zoned districts that are being removed, so we needed to make sure that we get that one back on. Lovell and Stadium, we looked at pulling some Live Work 1 zoning a couple lots further from the Stadium intersection after talking to some property owners there. And 2130 Parkview Avenue, which is a property that kind of is adjacent to and behind the commercial at Oakland and Parkview, which originally we had included as commercial because of its location and frontage on Oakland and Parkview, and have since changed to residential multifamily. When we created our districts, one of the things that we thought about was, again, that what the master plan told us to think about, which was how streets and land use kind of work together. And so these are two kind of good examples. Both of these, all the pink is the same thing, right? It's all community commercial, which is our largest scale commercial district, intended for regional shopping and kind of arterial commercial. But these two areas are very different, right? And so Stadium Drive tends to have larger lots. There is not a solid link to that commercial to the residential neighborhoods adjacent to it. Both geographically and because no streets go through, and it's not terribly walkable. Stadium Drive is a fast street, multiple lanes, and few places to cross. Versus West Edge, south of White's, which has much smaller lots. That commercial that exists is at the end of residential blocks, right? So it's kind of like a cap to what goes on in the neighborhood to the east and the west. It is relatively walkable, especially coming down from the neighborhoods to access some of those uses. West Edge itself may feel fast today. There is talk about adjusting speed limits, looking at improving pedestrian elements there for crossing, and so that is both the transportation and the land use beginning to change. And so that's how we started to differentiate areas, and why, when you look at the map, Stadium Drive remained community commercial, that larger scale one, and other places like the south area of West Edge became community commercial 2, which is the smaller version of that. Let's talk about uses. There were quite a few tweaks in the use section. We updated the use table and the standards with our new districts, of course. We had to put those into the use table. and tried to label things with a little more clarity. We use a classification that a lot of cities don't use in their use table. So we have uses that are permitted by right. We have uses that require a special use permit. And again, the special use permit means that use is appropriate in that district, but it needs some review to make sure that it works for that lot that it's being proposed on. We also have a classification that is permitted with development standards. And what that means is that it's permitted by right as long as you are following the standards that we lay out for you. And that allowed some real clarity in some uses that sometimes got pushed into special use that really didn't need to be. They didn't match with the criteria that the special use permit lays out. But there were some things associated with them that we could control by putting in some development standards. And so that's when you see in the code PD, it means that there's some specific standard to that use that you need to follow. And if you do, it is permitted by right. We updated the accessory use and structure table. I already mentioned the chicken and rabbits, so those needed to come in. The state created a new marijuana or cannabis license type, and that is micro business class A. We already allow micro businesses in certain locations, but we did not specifically allow type A. And what that means is that it has a different number of plants that you're allowed. It has different components for micro business is a one-stop shop kind of thing. It is grow, process, sell. And the original micro business is grow, process, sell your own product only. Whereas micro business class A allows people to bring in other people's product to help make that business a little more economically viable, because as the state reviewed it in the first couple of years of operation, it wasn't working the way they intended. So we need to be very specific in the code that one is allowed just like regular microbusiness license. We also added in restrictions as when this was something that we did more recently to prevent more intense commercial uses on residential streets. So in the past, in some cases, we created new districts that were more fine grain and only allowed a certain number of uses or had different parameters on them, and we had those mapped in places. We found often that those were challenging to implement because they were so narrowly written that often uses that would be appropriate or match others weren't allowed. And we ended up with all these classifications that were kind of unitaskers. They really did one thing, and there's a way to handle that transition area between a commercial corridor and residential, and we do that using our street types. Vehicle service. Vehicle service saw a few updates, and one of the things that garnered quite a bit of discussion during the spring outreach process was whether or not a car wash should be or not be a special use in the community commercial district. We heard from the community that there was quite a bit of concern if it didn't remain a special use. So we left it as a special use that has been changed and updated. Outdoor sales and service is another use classification that has seen some updates. Outdoor sales and service are things like the storage and sale of anything from a vehicle to the sheds that you see in some places, to loose materials like you would see at a landscaping company. And we have a series of standards that go along with that, including being very clear on what we mean by loose materials, making sure that we're thinking about the surface that a material is stored on, whether it's loose or a vehicle, being very clear that it's meant to be an improved surface, which is concrete or asphalt. Thinking about, often we find these uses in neighborhoods or on commercial corridors that are adjacent to neighborhood, and for vehicle sales, that's just fine, but we need to make sure that they're being designed and set up in a way that still allows circulation, making sure that we're not overhanging the sidewalks with vehicles, and so really thinking through standards that pull some of those items away from the property lines. And we also added, because it was something that was in NFP that we took out, a setback when you have loose materials from water resources or wetlands, and we use the definitions that we have in NFP and added a setback regardless of your location, nothing to do with NFP, just to keep those materials away from that space, and that is a setback of 50 feet. In-home daycare, we've seen several of these as of late. One of the hiccups that we've seen is that requirement to have the 7 to 12 on what is defined as an arterial. We know that in-home daycare is an asset to the community. We know that it's something that is needed in all of our neighborhoods, and the standards have a number of other requirements that are more relevant to the use. Things like the fencing around the playground, and thinking about sizes and those kind of things. So we have removed the street classification requirement and had been thinking about doing that for quite some time. We've had several variance requests over the years, not just the one that was most recently seen by this body. Okay, so let's go back to the zoning districts and do a quick reminder of what is changing. So we are removing CO, which is commercial office, commercial neighborhood office, commercial neighborhood 1, commercial neighborhood 2, CMU and RMU, which is commercial mixed use and residential mixed use. Anything that's in gray exists in the text, but not on a map. So it's a text-only district that we aren't currently using. CMU and RMU are mixed-use districts. We have created new mixed-use districts. We did several years ago and have started mapping them, and so we're looking at making that a little more extensive and removing the CMU and RMU and replacing it with LivWork 1 or LivWork 2. We have several overlay districts, many of which exist in text only, that we're not using and have no plans to use. Things like neighborhood conservation, historic preservation, and I can't believe that I am blanking on the name of the THD, traditional housing development, and riverfront overlay. Now, we use the riverfront overlay. It is mapped in a number of places on the east side of the city, both in the north side neighborhood, bits in the east side neighborhood, Edison, and it kind of creeps a bit into downtown. So everything kind of around the river, as Michigan Avenue heads out, Harrison, Kings Highway area. Thoughtful creation of a district set of standards. At the time, overlays were the practice for these design guideline kind of standards, rather than just requiring it in the code the way we do now. It divided the area into 9 specific districts that were very specific. So specific that we constantly run into variance requests that are very legitimate based on the variance standards. And since this overlay was put on this area, it was meant to encourage development of a mixed-use type. Really nothing has happened, very little development. And part of it, we believe, staff believes, has been because of some of the zoning standards have been very difficult there. And so we are proposing to remove the riverfront overlay as a result. We are going to be adding 2 new districts. So we created a smaller commercial district called CC2. And following our master plan, we created a commercial node. Several years ago, we created the neighborhood node. So these both kind of operate under the same concept, which are small concentrations, nodes, centers of development that occur scattered throughout the city. Neighborhood nodes are those very small, highly walkable, sometimes just the corners of an intersection, sometimes they're a block, that exist throughout our neighborhood. Things like Washington Square or West Nedge and Vine, Ransom and Church areas. Commercial node is kind of the same principle. It's a concentration of commercial development that serves the neighborhood, but it also serves a broader area. It serves a broader area because it's a little bit bigger. It tends to be located on major roads, and very often was developed in a way that is a bit more suburban. It has grocery stores, so large parking areas, and serve not just those that are, easy walking distance, but something broader. So these are things like Oakwood Plaza area, Cork and Lovers, is another example. Westnedge and Whites is a third. And so we already created a zoning district following the master plan for the neighborhood node. It's time to do one for the commercial node, and that's what we proposed. It's important to remember that we do have two types of zoning standards associated with our districts, right? We have form-based districts, which we apply in our walkable urban areas. So that's downtown, the live-work districts, and the neighborhood node. And again, in addition to things like height, placement of the building on the lot, they include regulations about entrances and transparency, which is that ratio of windows to wall. They use tools like a build-to zone, which says your building must be located within this area versus I don't care where your building is as long as it's behind a line that I set for you. And we use that thinking about walkability, thinking about areas that are active and vibrant. And again, we know that it's not just the fact that there's a nice sidewalk that makes people walk, it's also giving them places to walk by and to. And so thinking about using these districts in those key places. We also have a series of districts that do the basics. So things like, the height, where the building goes on the lot, and so forth. And those, in this set of code updates, that's our community commercial, the CC district, which is not, already exists in the code, community commercial 2, and commercial node. We have one kind of special unique district that's institutional campus. Institutional campus exists today. It's in Chapter A, Appendix A, moving into Chapter 50. You recently reviewed Kalamazoo College's campus master plan. So as a reminder, institutional campus is a district that allows for the adjustment of zoning standards and requirements based on a plan. That plan must be renewed every 10 years, and it allows flexibility for unique land uses, things like campuses, college campuses, hospital campuses, could be an industrial or office campus, and allows you to kind of create standards, thinking about things like, gosh, I'm going to think about parking for the campus as opposed to parking for each individual building. Or I'm going to think about stormwater management for everything rather than every time I bring one building, right? And how do you do that in a more effective way? So just as a reminder, form-based districts use standards that look like this, which are our lot types, highly illustrated, everything is defined. And again, the rationale is thinking about land use and transportation, encouraging active walkable areas. And then we have our commercial districts that are more standard. Now we do have requirements for the facades or the front-facing walls of the buildings in some of these districts if that building is located really close to the front property line. If it's set back, it doesn't matter because when you're zooming by at 45 miles an hour, you don't really see that storefront. But if you're going to have it built up to the front, then we want to make sure that you do have some minimum requirements to kind of blend that marriage between the suburban and urban character. So I should have put this graphic earlier. It's just a nice reminder of what an overlay district is. We have 2 overlay districts in Chapter 50. And the overlay district sits on top of the base zoning. So base zoning is going to be residential, commercial, industrial, mixed-use districts. Every property has a zoning designation, and the overlay sits on top of that. And it says it either adds additional requirements or it adjusts what's below. Again, we have 2, natural features protection, which was already in Chapter 50, and the planned unit development district, which exists in Appendix A. We're just cleaning it up and bringing it over. Natural features protection overlay was one of our changes that garnered a lot of attention and discussion this spring, and I think it is worth talking about. So one of the things that none of the standards in natural features protection were changed. None of the defined features that have things like setbacks or planting requirements, Those weren't changed with this, aren't being proposed to be changed with this process, but some of the other language is. And one of those, and the one that we've talked about quite a bit, is the intent language. And we worked with the Natural Features Protection Review Board, as well as the staff that handles, or this is the liaison for the Natural Features Protection Review Board, to make these changes. We feel that these are clarifications to what the intent of natural features always was. And so if you go back to when we created Natural Features Phase 1, for those of you that were on the board, I'm not sure anyone was on the board for Phase 1, James, maybe you were, but Phase 2, I think many of you were. We always talked about natural features protection as something that is not about no development. It's about how you do development differently and better, keeping in mind the natural features on a site. There has been a lot of confusion about the intent of natural features protection, and that has certainly been borne out through all the comment periods and discussions that we've had through this process, where there's been questions and concerned about, I thought it was no development, or it should be no development allowed. This is in the zoning code. Natural features protection is administered by a board, and we need clarity in what the intent of the rules of the standards are. And that clarity needs to be for the board, so they can rule effectively, for applicants, so they know how to think about the standards and how to make the requests, and for property owners, both in NFP and out of NFP area, to understand what it should be used, how it's meant to be used. And the goal is to get everybody on the same page with the way it was described when initially created. So to that extent, to that intent, a couple of changes were made to this language. First, the intent of the NFP is to protect the natural features that we defined. So things like trees, water resources, wetlands, slopes, floodplains, woodlands, habitat corridors. And then added that the intent also is to guide site development, balancing growth and redevelopment with the protection of our existing natural features, and to create site designs that are responsive to the existing natural features and minimize impacts to the extent possible. So when we have seen probably maybe a dozen or more properties have come forward for site plan approval in the natural features protection overlay. And from kind of initial concept phase to, when they're done with site plan or going for building permits, we see how natural features protection overlay standards have altered plans to provide additional space, additional buffer, and more protection of the features that are on the site. And we see that through our evolution of those plans. And again, just want to make sure that that language is clear for all parties involved. All base zoning districts have what's called a lot coverage requirement, and that is a percentage of your property that you're allowed to cover with pavement or buildings, rooftops, so things where water cannot be absorbed into the ground. We refer to those areas as impervious, so the water hits it and runs off. The natural features protection overlay included several guidance statements about how to think about lot coverage and where to put it and what it means to help property owners decide how to apply that space on their property, that lot coverage requirement. And initially in the first draft, we just removed all of those because we found that some of them were a little difficult to apply, and we didn't think that they were actually meeting the intent that they were meant to because they lifted up anything that was pervious, even if it was turf grass or gravelly areas as semi-impervious, which really wasn't the intent. So we have, through conversations with the NFP board and the community, we have brought some of that language back, specifically requesting that so a property that is in the NFP ordinance, when they come up with their areas of perviousness, thinking about those as being contiguous to a natural feature, or to make them as big as possible to be by a natural feature. So we're not chunking them up into really small pieces. Because on a development, everything that's pervious counts, right? So if you have a landscape island and it's 7 by 15, that counts as a part of your number, right? Or it's a little strip in the front of your building and maybe a little bit on the side. In a property that has natural features protection on it, we'd like you to think about it in larger pieces, if not all in one piece, if you can, to give that feature a little more space. We also added language for violations and continue to review this in-house. One of the sections of the code that is not part of this, but that we are going to be updating in the near future, is our enforcement, administration, review, and enforcement and violations. And so we'll continue to review these standards as we look at how we treat violations of the code in general. Okay, so let's talk about parking, landscape, and screening. We are moving from, right now we have a code that sets a minimum amount of parking for each project as well as a maximum. We are removing the minimum with this action. And we have adjusted the maximums. So we have one maximum for our more urban walkable areas and a larger overage that you're allowed to go over in areas that don't have on-street parking, don't have shared parking opportunities, aren't as transit-rich, to bring in some of that context. So remove the minimum, which is often a barrier for our infill projects. Kalamazoo is a built-out community. Much of it was built far before the focus of the automobile, and when you're talking about if we're really going to commit and support small businesses and folks using those existing structures and those very small lots, then we need to think about how we do parking, because parking is the thing that trips up everybody all the time. And this is not a Kalamazoo issue, this is an issue around the country. And so thinking about maximums rather than minimums is something that is a movement that's happening across Michigan, but also nationally. Landscape and screening, one of those that exists in A that we're bringing over. We've made some changes to it to make sure that it aligns with the Community Sustainability Plan and the Natural Features Protection Ordinance, specifically things like a tree canopy requirement. So our Community Sustainability Plan outlines a goal for having a citywide tree canopy, which is, think about the spread of a tree, right? That's the tree canopy, right? And so how do we have at least a minimum amount across the whole city? Right now we have some neighborhoods are very high, some neighborhoods are very low. The goal is to get everybody to a better place. And we can do that by thinking about when you redevelop a lot, requiring the planting of a or more than one tree based on the size of your lot. Again, tying it to that community sustainability plan. We also incorporated the construction fencing requirements in the NFP into our landscape code. We think those are a great way to make sure that whatever we're protecting during construction on a site is protected thoughtfully. We worked with a landscape architect to read the proposed landscape code. It's been since 2005 since it saw major updates, and we wanted to make sure that what we're proposing not only, we felt confident about how it would meet our goals, but we wanted to make sure that in practice that it flowed and read well and worked. So we worked with a local firm to read it and made some updates. And we also, the one thing that's new is we added a sight distance, a little triangle of sight distance at intersections, at driveways, to make sure that landscaping wasn't blocking the view as people are backing in and out. And we very clearly added a standard about vegetation that exists at the property line, particularly if on a front or corner property line, to make sure that it is not impeding access, clearly access into the road, but also access to the sidewalk. So that has been added. Signs. Signs, again, is something that exists today in Appendix A, and we are just moving it over and have updated it. It has seen updates for several reasons. One, again, since 2005, right? It needed an update. There have been some court cases, specifically a Supreme Court case known as Reed versus the town of Gilbert, Arizona, that really focused on how a city defines temporary signs that really has led cities across the country since that case to make adjustments to their code. We wanted to make sure that we were in doing that as well. We also keep track of our variances, right? And so there have been a lot of variances, for example, about signs in residential districts, because we don't allow signs in residential districts really in our current code. I mean, we talk about very specific residential uses, but there are a lot of other things that exist in residential districts, like churches and schools and parks. And in some of our residential districts, the way they're written right now, you're allowed to do some small commercial, but you're not allowed a sign, right? So we've had some variance requests that have come forward, and so we've made sure that we've clarified that language in the code. We added a bunch of illustrations for all of our sign types, and really have thought through kind of an evolution of the sign code to now that we are doing so many changes to our streets, thinking about the types of signs that work in different locations. So things like in downtown, on Michigan Avenue in Kalamazoo, the way those streets exist now, they're pretty fast, they're very wide, and so the signs that we've allowed there are more typical of signs that you would see out on Stadium or Drake. So very tall, kind of traditional freestanding signs. And as those streets change, as they become narrower, as there is more pedestrian activity, as the land use changes, in addition to the form-based code standards that we have in the area that now bring buildings, and all the buildings in downtown, more towards the front, we need to make sure that our sign standards match. And so changes to, we did a big review of all the existing signs and their height and area, and did some research on what exists and what the impacts would be, and made some changes accordingly. Finally, lighting. So we had a lot. So first of all, we moved it from Appendix A. It exists right now. It's a very short section. We did some cleanups, but it is essentially the same more or less the same code that it is today, just in Chapter 50. We had a lot of very thoughtful comments on lighting and how we could make changes to our lighting code that would be more in alignment with the Community Sustainability Plan and Dark Sky Initiative. I am not able to accurately do that research right now for this process. So what I am suggesting is that we keep our existing standards, we move them over. We have a new sustainability planner who was recently hired, who is super excited to dive in and do some research on this. And we can figure out how we incorporate the standards that exist in these ordinances. And these are things like light zones, right? It's creating a transect or a gradation of light, the amount of light that you can have based on the development. It's not a perfect circle out, right? It depends on your nodes and development, and that takes a little time to calibrate for your community. There are communities like Ann Arbor that have a really innovative code that talk about temperature and the type of light, and we want to make sure that if we're putting those in the code, that we're doing it thoughtfully for Kalamazoo, but also in a way that we can make sure that we can enforce, right, and administer. So we heard some great comments, and we are committed to diving deeper and bringing forward those changes early next year when we have lots of sections that are going to be coming forward still, because we do hope to finish this slow incremental process in the next year, right? So we have a couple of small sections that we hope to bring forward sooner rather than later, which lighting could probably be one of that. And then larger district updates, residential, we have manufacturing, and a few others that we'll hope to bring next spring forward to this board. So that is where lighting is. So let's talk quickly about what's next. I've kind of grayed out where we've been. So informational presentation to you, and I look forward to your questions. We are planning a public hearing in September. So a public hearing is an opportunity for us to do a presentation again, talk about the details, what's changed, talk about the map. Prior to that, the state requires us, and we've already done it once in this process, but we're doing it again, to send letters to property owners who are included in the proposed rezoning. We'll put our notice in the newspaper, presentation in front of you, more public comment, and think about how we move this process forward. This board makes a recommendation to the City Commission, and the City Commission reviews any changes over a two-step process. They do a first reading, which is essentially an announcement. Hey, we have these code changes. We're putting everybody on alert. We're going to have a public hearing on X date. And then there's a public hearing, and they have the opportunity to take action after that public hearing. And so that is where we are moving. We have been talking for a long time about this, and we feel that we are in a place where we're able to start that public approval process. So with that, I would like to entertain any of your questions that you have on the code. And then I know you want to allow the opportunity for comment on the code now rather than in item G, I think, which is next, which is great.
Yeah, we're in G now, so, yeah. So
Questions?
Yeah, questions. Well, first of all, it's been said before and it needs to be said again. This represents an incredible amount of work, and thank you for all this. But questions for Christina? Wow, you've answered everybody's thoughts.
Somehow I doubt that.
Okay, please go ahead.
I think I got one. I just want to make sure I understand the process that,
Yep.
that we're in. So I think the question I wrote down as I was listening is, when will we get the final review for the final product?
Sure.
For the total code changes? And I heard you say that you will send a letter out to the people that are a part of the potential code changes. How does that work?
Sure.
And then how is that determined for those individuals to be a part of that process?
Sure. So I finished editing the zoning code today based on the comments we received in June and July, and so I'll put up version 3 tomorrow. We'll see what version 3 might be pretty close to what we see in September. We'll see if there are any small changes. If there are, I'll make sure that I point them out in my presentation in September. By state law, we have to notice when there's a rezoning. So if it's just a text amendment, you put a notice in the Gazette or the newspaper of record for your area, and that's your minimum requirement. That's what you have to do. Of course, we would have meetings and have discussions on it as well. When you are changing the zoning classification of a property, you have to send notice to the owner and the occupant of that property. And so that we owner and occupants, right? So if it's a multifamily building, each occupant gets a letter, as well as whoever is the property owner. If they have a different address, they get a letter. If you have clusters of 11 or more properties together, which we do in many cases for this project, you do not also have to send the 300-foot notice. So normally, most of our things, many of our zoning notices require the property owner and the occupants as well as 300 feet. The state does not require that, and for when you're doing large rezonings, because that would be a lot to mail. People will get multiple notices because they're within multiple distances of properties. And so we look at the map. We definitely do all property owners and occupants. And then when there are smaller clusters, we follow the standard rules and move forward. So I have an estimate. Right now it's about 4,700 letters that we're going to be sending out to cover all of that. They have to be mailed no later than Tuesday, the 22nd of August, so at least 15 days in advance. We're going to try and get them out earlier, but that would be meeting the 15-day requirement. So it's a lot. And our goal will be, when we do big zonings, the last few big zonings, instead of a form letter in an envelope, we have sent a large format postcard to folks. That's what we did for the wellhead protection, and I believe we did that for NFP. It's what we did at the beginning of this process. And the postcard has all the information, links, QR codes, phone numbers for information, and all of that, as a way to get that information out to the community, where they can find the code online, or if they want a paper copy, what does that look like? And so that is the process for bringing forward a map change or a rezoning.
So to clarify what you just said to Commissioner Harrison, if version 3 is you're going to post that tomorrow, and at our next meeting, we're having the public hearing and potentially passing on our recommendation to the City Commission.
Correct.
So hopefully between now and that meeting, we will review, it would be on us to look that up and read those changes in version 3 before that meeting. We don't want to learn about the change at the
Right.
same meeting we would be making a recommendation on it.
Ooh. Right.
Okay.
If there are changes, and there may be a few,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the document is in fairly good shape. If there are changes, I will point them out to you. I would certainly, if there's anything major, it would be listed in the staff report that you'll get, right, outlining what has changed.
Gotcha, yeah. Other questions for staff at this point? I'm sure we'll have, in the course of our discussion, other questions may come up, sure. Okay, so at this point, I wanted to have another public comment section specifically about the our proposed zoning code and map update. If there's anyone here who specifically wants to talk about that, now would be the time, not during our regular public comment later. That would not be appropriate to speak about it now and then speak about it later also. This is the time. So I welcome folks up to speak about that, and any callers as well, 888-382-9556. Specifically public comment about the proposed zoning code and map update.
Hi, my name is Tina, which most of you know me, for I have been fighting this battle of our last green space to save it ever since December 18th of 2017, when David Anderson put a flyer on our doors wanting to destroy our last green space to build KBCC, then to build 80 units of apartments, now to build 36 in a known floodplain area. See, we were already lied to once by the city when KBCC took away 12 acres across the street to build. It made us our flooding problem every year since then, sometimes 2 to 3 times a year. Did you know a natural green space? Anyone who has access to a natural green space loves the wildlife. Access to green space and trees are calming, relaxing, helps increase mental health. Tree canopy, shade, air, and it overall the neighborhood temperature. Stress relief helps with climate change. And your NFP board, useless, does nothing to save anything in a floodplain area. Whatever a developer wants to build, and if you are on that board, you can change to whatever you want. I say every neighborhood needs a green space, at least one, even in poor neighborhoods. These are the ones you are destroying. We are asking that you don't rezone our last green space in Southtown neighborhood. So Lisa from Lyft and David Anderson, the president of Lyft, so they cannot destroy our last green space and build their apartments. They can build them right across the street, 322 Stockbridge. We also ask that someone that is not involved in any of the boards do a survey of our last green space, Lake to Stockbridge, an environmental impact survey, to see what this new building will do to the environment and how it will impact flooding. See the wildlife that live there, like the red-tailed hawk, the cranes, the bats, the owl. None of you care what this will do to the environment or the homeowners or the business that live there. All we ask, whatever we ask, always goes on deaf ears. No one seems to care. It's all about the money and developing Kalamazoo. How about you fix the sewers and the sanitary sewers that are overwhelming on Lake Street, John, Burdick, Crosstown? How about you fix the flooding instead of making it worse for us? And how about you put your apartment sewer on Stockbridge and not on Lake? I know.
Thank you, Tina. Your time is up. Thank you.
My name is Rochelle Habeck. I'm a resident of the city, and I appreciate the chance to speak to you tonight and the work of the planning staff and yourselves in this rather enormous undertaking. A copy of the email that I sent to Ms. Anderson, I think, has been provided to you. I just want to speak in support of the changes that have been made to maintain the special use permits for sensitive areas, and to retain a focus on the natural features protection. I'm a little bit mystified as to why we use language in interpreting that seems to diminish the full potential of the wording that's already there. As I read them, I see them as visionary words that allow you the opportunity to protect and to balance. It's not to just sort of minimize the disruption to development. So I think there's a lot of power unused in the existing definition. I just would like to ask that you consider seriously a zoning designation for green space to our code. I heard this suggested at a recent hearing, and progressive communities, I understand, have adopted such a zoning code, and I think that would provide a very proactive way to go after some of the concerns of our community in an organized fashion. I'd also like to ask that the Planning Commission and planning staff, along with our city manager and city commission, request a presentation from Swim Lake and WMU on the Michigan Climate Resilience Study. It's really a fascinating piece of work, and it will show you where the contiguous pieces are that have potential to create resilience in our county. And there are some opportunities, and the Asylum Lake properties are one of the most important pieces left that can contribute to it. It's a pretty efficient presentation. We've got a tremendous resource that you could make use of, and I think it would create a more visionary approach to some of the work that you have the opportunity to do. Lastly, my real dream here is that we not give up on those properties that Mr. Tarani currently owns. They are our last best green space. And I do think there are hundreds of people in this community who would work together with our philanthropists and other nonprofits to put together an effort to purchase these properties, even though the price may be difficult. Many people have expressed this wish. It would give us the chance to do something forward-looking that really moves us in the direction that we have put words to, and let us really build something special for the future to help protect our climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Vicki Vanis. I live at 326 Lake Street. If you've never experienced it, you can only imagine the sinking feeling of watching the rain pelt away hour after hour and watching your backyard fill up, then your streets flood, and finally your own basement, inch by inch, foot by foot, not knowing at what level it will stop. All the time knowing that it's just going to be a waiting game till the water recedes and you will have the aftermath to deal with. During this time, no water can be run, no toilets flushed or showers taken, because whatever goes down a drain comes up in your basement. On Lake Street, we have dealt with this scenario many times in the past. The only thing different about this year is that we have been experiencing a drought. However, due to global climate change, it is expected that the weather will become more extreme over time. So the next flooding episode may be worse than the last, and of course it will be with fewer trees to take up water. We already have a sewer system that cannot manage the job, yet when we met with the lift developers, we found that the city has told them they have to run their sewer line not to Stockbridge a few yards away, but all the way down the length of the wooded area, ripping out trees as they go to empty into the sewer line under Lake Street. It feels like for every inch we gain, the city and Lyft take a foot. It feels like we are being pushed from our homes. It has never been explained to us why Lyft is so set on building their low-income housing unit on a floodplain and infringing on the only wild green space in our area. It has never been explained why this project can't be built on the old DHS site right down the road where it is already cleared of trees and mostly paved. I am sure that it is a money issue, and the city wants to invest as little as possible in affordable housing. But think about the message that is sending. If you are wealthy, you get better care and treatment from the city, and if you are poor, we will do as little as possible and even work against you if it suits our goals, because you just aren't worth investing in. You are supposed to work for all the citizens of Kalamazoo. When all of the poor and low-income folks are shunted into one area and then that area is neglected, you set people up to feel disenfranchised and like they don't belong, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many will feel so stuck that they give up and don't care about their surroundings or trying to move up. This does not strengthen a city. We have a chance to do it different in Kalamazoo, to integrate all socioeconomic levels so everyone has an equal opportunity to do.
I'm sorry, your time is up. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Tom. I'm going to be speaking about something that somebody touched on already. I started a petition last month to establish one or more districts explicitly designed to protect Kalamazoo green spaces and ecologically sensitive areas. This is basically just the petition language. What's prompting this proposal? During a recent city planning community meeting, here on City Hall on 629, there was community input regarding the establishment of a new district for the purpose of preserving green space. The issue was raised because current zoning draft proposes a zoning change to the Oakwood Memorial Beach near Oakland Drive and Parkview Avenue. Currently split zone, city planning is proposing that it be zoned solely residential. When asked why this wouldn't be zoned something that would better represent its green space characteristics, city planning said that no such district exists in Kalamazoo, which really surprised me and others. City planning then acknowledged that some cities do, however, have dedicated green space and conservation districts, which would be worth considering for Kalamazoo. It's worth noting that a zoning district like this is distinct from the natural features protection overlay, which is merely a guideline as opposed to restricting development altogether. With that in mind, I'm proposing that Kalamazoo add one or more zoning districts that would be applied to this park, as well as many other parcels that would benefit from Kalamazoo's stated dedication to environmental protections, best represented by our own community sustainability plan. At every community meeting, this one included, the community continues to emphasize environmental protections as their top concern, as one of their top concerns, and I think that this would achieve what everybody wants, as opposed to just the overlay. I have examples from other states, Wisconsin Natural Resource and Recreation District, another one in Wisconsin, Upland Resource Conservation District, Recreational Park District, Institutional Park District, Preservation District in Maryland, Environmental Conservation District. This was just a quick Google. I found all these cool things that we could have and probably should have. I know this is going to create a lot of work for Christina and her team, so I'm sorry about that, but I really think that we can squeeze it in. Another really cool thing I found, which you guys are probably already aware of, is the 2003 Open Space and Parkland Preservation Millage in Ann Arbor, known as the Greenbelt Millage. 2/3 of millage proceeds are used for the Greenbelt program, protecting land outside the city, and 1/3 for protecting land acquisition inside the city. It's really fascinating stuff. I have documents to share if you guys are interested.
Thank you.
Didn't plan on saying anything this evening, but given the subject matter, my name is Eric. I'm from Kalamazoo. I recently just moved back to the city, living south of downtown. I walked here this evening. It was very pleasant. And so just as a citizen of the city of Kalamazoo, I'd like to voice my support for any zoning changes that would continue to make the city of Kalamazoo more walkable and protect green space. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak specifically about our proposed zoning code and map update? Okay, seeing no one here. Bobby, anybody on the phones?
Good evening, caller. You're on with the City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission for public comments on the presentation on proposed zoning changes.
Can you hear me, Bobby?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
My name's Richard Stewart. I reside at 828 Portage Street. I've been a resident of the city of Kalamazoo since '87. Had a business in the what we call Southtown area now since that time. I just want to ask how you define the term outreach that Christina Anderson boasts about. Outreach is not talking at us, and if you're not going to include our input, then what good is it? I have personally taken the opportunity to discuss directly with Christina as well as my neighbors, and our input is denied. We are not included. I have rejected her generous offer to rezone my parcels 824, 828, and 842 Portage Street to the undesirable LW1 or LW2, robbing me of my valuable M1 zoning that I invested in. Portage Street is one of the most diverse neighborhoods, business districts in the city, always has been. She rejects that, and point blank, I have nothing to say on the matter to her. I have attended public meetings. My neighbors have also contacted her. She just simply refuses. So I did some investigating. I found that there is a racist, ableist policy with Christina that I think each of you should hold her accountable to. I have found that she blanket rezones LW1 and LW2 in neighborhoods that are predominantly minority and disabled owned parcels. I asked her to identify any examples of parcels sold after being rezoned LW1 or 2. She could not provide one. I could not find any. CC zone, however, is the most desirable and valuable zoning of commercial property a person can own, a regular person like me or a regular person in general. CC, not CC2, CC. And I have found her rob people of valuable zoning, predominantly minority and disabled owned parcels. And specifically now, she targets Portage Road, that is a diverse neighborhood. Not only does she continue to insult me calling things walkable neighborhoods, that is an ableist term that I ask her to stop using and get some ableism training. Now I ask you to hold her accountable and go into diverse neighborhoods and stop robbing people of their valuable property. One size does not fit all. Just because zoning looks good on a map there are property owners.
There are no more callers.
Thank you. Okay, back to our discussion stage. And if we had any more questions for Christina, we can start out that way. What are you thinking? Well, go ahead.
I think, oh, sorry, I didn't realize it was on. I wanted to, if I could add a little more information to some of the comments we received, if that would be okay. I did mean to touch on the petition that Tom mentioned in his comments. And I had it on my notes and didn't bring it up when we talked about the zoning districts. A couple of things. We currently have a district in Appendix A called the P District. It allows public uses. So that includes parks. It also includes schools and civic buildings and government offices. And so it's a all-encompassing kind of public district. We will be reviewing that because it's still in Appendix A, so that's something that's going to need to be reviewed and figure out how we use it. It is not mapped. It's one of those ones that just exists in our world as text only. And so understanding if that is a valuable district to us and what it should include is something that we are committed to do as we continue to update the zoning code. I absolutely said in June that I do know of some cities, particularly large cities, that have a lot of greenfield development, meaning they're not a built-out community like Kalamazoo, but are expanding into areas and often have what's called a unified development ordinance, which means their zoning code is combined with their subdivision or laying out of the streets and lots code together. And I have seen park districts in those codes, and that's what I mentioned in June, that allow park development. They are not necessarily conservation districts. They allow for regional parks, and it would say, oh, regional parks should have football fields or basketball courts, or your skate park goes in that one, but in the pocket parks in the neighborhood, which is another district, you would do, you don't do that, and you tend to just have grass. The petition does have a lot of examples of conservation districts, other types of districts that are more conservation focused, but they are not no development. If you go through and review them, they tend to include often agriculture uses. This is not, each one is a little different because each one is tailored to that community, but pastures and barns and buildings associated with agriculture often allow residential development, single-family kind of large lot residential development. And I say that because zoning is a document that is meant to guide development. And so zoning as a as an environmental protection tool is limited because it's always kind of part of its lens is always going to have to include some amount of development associated with it. That doesn't mean that we couldn't create districts in future updates to think about parks and public space districts, but in terms of no development, that is something that is challenging, right? We need to be very careful on property rights and development rights and how districts with limited allowances work, right? Because we can't take away private property rights. And so if we did create such a district, it would have to be one that, that allows, for example, that allows parks and different types and size of parks and parks development. It wouldn't be something that we would map on other people's properties. It would either have to be requested or used only on city properties. So I just want to kind of be clear on that. Absolutely, we'll look at the P district with our next update and understand, if there's some, what other districts we need to include. At this point in time, I can't do that, right? It would take a lot of time, and we want to make sure that we be doing something that's right and not just grabbing things from other communities that don't particularly match. And then the other, just to clarify, the NFP ordinance is not a guideline. the NFP are standards. You have to follow what's in the NFP ordinance versus a guideline, which is more of an optional standard. So I just want to be clear. I think it was said that NFP are guidelines. They're not guidelines. They are actually standards. It might be splitting hairs, but there is a difference between those two terms. I think those are most of the things that I wanted to comment on. But I'm happy to answer other questions, either related to public comment or things that you've thought about in the code itself.
Okay, thank you. Just a moment. I was going to say regarding the green space district or preservation districts, I think it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. It's something I'd like to learn more about, but I don't think it's anything we could do anything about unless it's a way down the road kind of thing. We need to learn a lot, and it sounds very complicated and a lot of legal concerns. So maybe it's something to learn about.
You want to make sure that whatever you do, you're tailoring it correctly to your community. And so I think this package is large, and what's in it is really well thought out. And these changes in many cases are a long time coming. Even though we started the public part of this process earlier this year, we actually updated, the sign code we started to update the sign code and have conversations with the sign code 2 years ago. So there are a lot of people who are waiting for these updates to move forward with projects or updates to their property. Moving this forward does not mean we can't spend time exploring those other pieces. And we have multiple other opportunities to be looking at the code in the next year as we finish this kind of incremental update and get everything out of A and get it, get 50 updated the way we want.
Understood. This is a very detailed process. Commissioner Harrison. Okay. Well, I'll kick off one thing. When we've heard a lot of talk about concerns about the intent changes with the NFP, and as I read those wordings, I think there may be some misunderstanding about what the wording is saying. As I read number 2, it sounds to me as a reinforcement, really, or clarification. If we say to guide site development, I don't think anybody needs to be afraid of the word development there. I think in certain places development is going to happen, and by having the NFP, it provides a balance over not having it. And so it provides some check on that growth and development by protecting the existing natural features. So I don't think there's anything to be concerned about in that wording in my thinking. I don't know what the other commissioners think about that. Just to throw that out for discussion.
Also, if commissioners want background on that, the NFP meetings where they discussed the proposed changes to the language are all recorded and available for review if you're interested in hearing their discussions.
I'll just say that it seems like it would only be triggered if a development were to happen, that review. So addressing it in a development context seems appropriate.
I took a lot of notes. I don't remember where they went. Go right ahead.
One question from the email comment I just wanted to put out there on the record, asked staff to clarify the context around removing those properties from the zoning map, and just if you could clarify that.
Sure. So I talked at the top of or earlier this evening about how we started the process, right? And we looked at all properties that were zoned commercial and all properties that were on commercial corridors, which the corner of Drake and Stadium is a commercial corridor, and so therefore it was included in our initial process. It quickly became the point of conversation, and we realized that there needed to be more discussion on it, and that doing that through this process was going to limit our discussions on all the other topics. And so we removed those properties from this update. And so they remain as they are today, which is they're split zoned, a mix of RM15, which is residential multifamily 15, and RS5.
Thank you.
Okay, found my notes. As this is our chance to talk, I mean, we can always bring up concerns next time, but now's the best time to do it if we can. We went through an awful lot of things. Christina outlined the extensive work that the staff has done. A lot of things were just moved over. There's always cleanup editing of text, but there was also common sense changes, like that street requirement for daycare centers. And then there were substantive improvements, new districts, the C1 and C2, the Live Work 1 and Live Work 2, the changing to parking maximums instead of minimums, all these sorts of issues that are on here. Are there any of those, I'm just going to put it out, are any of those things that you're concerned about or you have questions about? Okay.
I have a question, and it's more of a reflective question as we've heard conversations, especially from the public, and just my own personal views. I get stuck on how we look at the line of the zoning codes and the changes. We hear how they are not effective for some of the residents and how they feel about what goes on, even though we can see the benefit of how to progress the city and the needs of the city. So I get stuck on that line, right? It just depends on what side you look at it to say who's it's going to benefit and who's it's not. So my hope is that we have a residential focus, right, that leads our work. So that is a piece that I am struggling with the zoning codes, even though I understand it and the word can't about not putting in the green space or the environmental protections, especially when we start to address the codes, you know, that are impactful for the whole community. It just, I'm in the middle, right? So as we review the codes, as they come out and we hear more from the public, I think that is where I'm at, to see, you know, even though they are effective for the community and the growth of Kalamazoo, do the residents want them?
I hear you. I know a lot of these changes aren't even talking about residential. They're all, you know, commercial and things like that. But so we do need to keep attention to residential. And were there much changes in the way of residential in the code changes proposed?
The only changes to residential districts in this, as it relates to the map, is in 2005, when we created our zoning map, we often took commercial and turned the corner. So it would go down a commercial corridor, and then we'd turn the corner and apply commercial districts to a few of the lots into the residential block. And I believe the rationale for that is if the commercial happened at the corner, you know, giving a little more depth, you know, potentially adding more commercial space might make those properties more viable or likely to develop as commercial. That did not happen. Those properties remain solidly residential, both in structure and use. And so there are many cases within the nearly 2,000 parcels that are getting rezoned where we took a look at that and put those parcels back to residential from commercial, because they're down a residential street, they function as residential, they're residential sized. And so that is the main change related to residential. There are, you know, slight changes to things like parking and home occupations and landscaping, which might incidentally impact residential. But most of our residential work will happen starting this winter, where we're going to do a overhaul, major review of the residential districts. But to answer Commissioner Harrison's thoughts, zoning is just kind of hard like that, right? It is an expression of the community vision from the master plan, and it is expressed through text, which impacts large areas, as well as the map, right, which is applied to parcels across the city. I can't speak to how other cities do zoning maps or how we did zoning maps in the past, I can only tell you how I do ours, whether it's this kind of bigger section, or if we're working directly from a neighborhood plan and doing just corridors within a neighborhood. We go lot by lot and look at the lot, look at, ask those questions. Oh, is it on a commercial street? Is it not on a commercial street? What should it be? How does it function now? What is its size, right? Because the goal is to get it right, and not have a whole bunch of variances that come down the road later, or requests for changes, or create, the goal is to also minimize the amount of nonconformances that we create, right? If we remember, nonconformances are those lots that no longer meet the standards, right? And you always have some of that when you change the zoning code, but you want to make sure that you're being as thoughtful about it as possible. And so zoning is just that, it just operates that way, right? It impacts individuals, it impacts larger areas, and there's always a balance between the two. There are guidances that we have for best practices and how you use zoning, and of course state and federal rules, right, for how we're allowed or not allowed to use zoning as a tool, and we use all of those. But really, we created this map in the same way that we've created all of the proposed zoning change maps since 2018 by going lot by lot, both physically walking around, driving, looking, as well as looking at aerials, Google driving streets, and looking at our online GIS system to understand lot size and lot area, to make sure that we're creating districts that work and align with the master plan and, of course, neighborhood plans. So it is, definitely a challenge. And, we heard one caller talk about Portage Street. The neighborhood plan talks about Portage Street as this mixed-use area. Right now, it's a mix of heavy commercial, so CC, even though it's not near a highway, it's not large lot commercial, regional shopping area, and manufacturing. And so that is not representative of the new developments that have started to come in there, and the desire of the neighborhood to have Washington Square as this active commercial area, and Portage Street that leads to it as a supportive active area with other commercial and residential. The projects that have happened in that area, for example, the Creamery building, which is it's a mixed-use building that is, I believe, 4 or 5 stories on the east side of the street, required, oh my gosh, like 6 variances to create. And it, what it created was something that the neighborhood wanted. There was a desire for that type of building and use. And zoning wasn't supporting that. So when we think about how we apply it in corridors and areas, we go back to the neighborhood plan and the larger vision and start to think about how the properties exist today, how they might change in the near future, and all of that gets factored in. Is what we have perfect? Is what I'm putting forward perfect? I'm sure it's not. But it really took into account all of those details in that fine-grained way to get it as close to perfect as possible.
And the Creamery added more residential, more living options too, wasn't it?
Sure,
Yeah.
it's a mixed-use building. It has a
Yeah.
daycare,
Yeah.
has some office space and residential units that are affordable.
Yeah. I don't mean to keep probing. If we don't have any other discussion, that's okay. So, all right, then next meeting we'll have our public hearing.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we've already had our public comment specifically about the zoning code and map updates. That's been covered. Bobby, I apologize to make you go through this 3 times in the course of one meeting, but now it's time for general public comment. If there's anyone in the audience here in the building that wants to come up and speak. Seeing no one. Bobby, anybody on the phones? A number I think I've said many times already.
Good evening, caller. You're on with the City of Kalamazoo Planning Commission for public comment.
Yeah, this is Richard Stewart, or resident 828 Portage Street, calling about the green space on 209 East Stockbridge development. The Imagine Kalamazoo master plan is illegitimate. They are using select neighborhood plans that totally ignore the actual neighborhood residents. We were not included in the neighborhood plan. The Southtown neighborhood was refused to be included by Christina, and our neighborhood plan recognizes that site as green space, as an NFP, protected natural green space, specific natural watershed, and wildlife habitat, the last 4 acres left in Southtown neighborhood. Southtown was created by the City Commission, Southtown Design Review District, in 2015 from Stockbridge to Walnut, Burdick to Portage. We formed our neighborhood then, and in 2018 the mayor notified us he, on the board of LIFT, wanted to develop a apartment building. We fought it from day one. We've been fighting it since. Now Alan Sylvester and Lisa Wilcott are the owners of Lockhart Management, the exclusive management company for LIFT who will profit the most from this development. They want to put a 54-car paved parking lot on our NFP. They have not considered any other site since 2018 when we started this fight. Alan Sylvester, being a member now of the NFP, was successful in rewording the guidelines. Your guideline to develop the NFP made way to pave 54-car paved parking lot over our NFP across the street from 10 acres of abandoned paved parking lot at the city property. This just is not legitimate, and we are continually ignored. Southtown neighborhood plan was ignored. That's why I can't save my property at 828 Portage Street by being ignored. Tina is the head of our neighborhood, and she spoke to you earlier. Thank you.
No further callers.
Thank you. I've been reminded that I skipped site plan list on our agenda. Are there any, you of course get the site plan list in your packet. Was there any comment on that? Okay. Thank you. City Commission liaison comments. Commissioner Pradel.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I first wanted to welcome new Commissioner DeCenzo. Correct? Did I get that right?
You got it.
Awesome, great. It's great to have additional expertise with the group, and welcome. Also wanted to make sure to take a chance to really recognize something that I think really deserves some recognition. Our local Michigan delegation, Senator McCann, Rep. Rogers, Rep. Morse, brought $20 million to the region for Business Loop 131. And this is huge. This is a big game changer. It's money for our region, but it's impact in the city of Kalamazoo. It's going to reduce congestion downtown on the north side, air quality improvement with having large trucks off of our roads through one of our core neighborhoods. So it's a huge win for the city. It's something that we've been trying to advocate with our regional partners for decades. $20 million, big win for the region, big win for our community as well. They also brought home about $553,000 for mental health supports with our public safety as well, which will be another really big impact for us as well. So I just wanted to make sure to thank our Michigan delegation for doing that and make sure to recognize them. At our next City Commission meeting on the 7th, we finally are going to see the Stewart Neighborhood Plan, which is a big deal, and I was here at Planning Commission quite some time ago, but I know our residents have been working on that for a long time, and our city staff as well, including Jay Slobby, who has been very active with that as well. So thank you for all their work. I wanted to just recognize all the neighborhoods who had National Night Out on Tuesday. I packed up with Commissioner Juarez and Vice Mayor Cooney in the same car, and we made it to 6 sites on Tuesday night. Had a fun time visiting all the sites, but wanted to recognize all the neighborhoods for coming out and having a great evening for our community as well. And then lastly, I just wanted to also recognize we've done a lot of work here. You've done a lot of work here. The city staff has done a lot of work here on the zoning code and map updates. We have heard a lot of updates, and I wanted to just recognize 2 ways that people, in addition to tonight, can watch previous sessions. Here in Commission Chambers on YouTube, you can watch, there was an update on June 29th, which is a really great chance to see some of the updates. But also at our July 17th City Commission Committee of the Whole meeting, we had a great update on the updates as well, and we also had some questions that we asked. So if the public wants to watch that, it's a really great way to get some more information. Every time I'm a part of these where we're getting these updates, I learn a little bit more, and it's really impressive to see how much information we can condense in those to help the public be more aware of those changes. So that's all I have for you. I hope you have a great month ahead. Hard to believe it's already August, but enjoy what's left of the summer. See everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Pareto. Planning Commissioner comments.
I just had a quick one from the notes I took. I wrote, moving forward, trying to establish, clarify, and making, and then I finally ended up with balancing our effect to connect, represent, and reflect the interests of the residents of Kalamazoo with our work, and not just the city or the businesses that it represents, knowing that I am responsible to a network of individuals, jobs, people that work here, a community, people that have missions and visions for what they expect to see in the community, but also my family and what we envision Kalamazoo to look like. So I think as we move forward, not only in planning, right, and codes and whatnot, but just our roles on the commission itself should be that balance, trying to figure out what's the best for those entities that we represent.
Thank you. The only thing I had is that I think when we approved earlier in this meeting the daycare expansion, I think we neglected to say that I think the application was clearly reflected the need. It came straight out of the ordinance. It was all the requirements were covered in the ordinance, and the staff report covered that very well, and it was very consistent with the ordinance and the master plan. But that's all for now. So thank you, everybody. Please.
Sorry, I just have one more. I just learned today, so this is for the public generally, that KPS schedule, the first half of the schedule is public. So if anybody has school-age kids, that could be useful information. Thanks.
If that's everything, okay, then we're adjourned.